Welcome in, everybody, to the week 3 version of the Dynasty Lessons Learned. I've done this each of the past 2 weeks so far for the 2024 season, so we're just running it back again for week 3. I have one takeaway from every single team, every single matchup and game over the past weekend of games, and just going to go through game by game, player by player, and talk about my main takeaway from every single team. So to kick things off with the Thursday night game from week 3 was the Patriots and the Jets. Not really much to say on the Patriots side of the ball. It's basically exactly what we expected to happen at the beginning of the year, that this offense is really, really bad. You can't trust anybody on this team except for really Ramondre Stevenson as kind of like a low-end RB2. And really at that, then, like we saw Ramondre not do all that well Thursday night with, I think he had negative fantasy points. So when the offense is just going to be that bad, Stevenson might get dragged down, but just based on volume alone, I still think that Stevenson is a solid back end RB2 or even like just a top 30 kind of a guy, just because of volume. And he has the upside of, if he, does anything with his own talent rather than the offense itself, then that's kind of where Ramondre is going to produce for fantasy. We'll see what happens when Drake May eventually gets named the starter here. I don't know if it's going to happen this week or next week, but I think eventually over the, in October some point, Drake May will get a chance to start and will be the starter moving forward. But that's at least the Patriots side of the ball. On the Jets side of the ball, I think we have to start talking about Garrett Wilson. 14 fantasy points Thursday night, 5 receptions, 33 yards, 1 touchdown. Did have 9 targets, which was a 25% target share. But currently his pace over the course of the season, based on the first 3 weeks, is 85 receptions for 850 yards and 6 touchdowns. That is not the breakout season that we were projecting for Garrett Wilson with Aaron Rodgers. He's still averaging 57% catch percentage with Rodgers, which was basically the same thing that he was averaging with Zach Wilson and Trevor Siemian and whoever else the Jets had over the past couple of years. It's still the same catch percentage with Aaron Rodgers. He has yet to surpass 60 yards in a game. He is still very much a target hog, and he's faced very elite corners over the past 3 weeks. But if he just doesn't break out this year, his value is in trouble, because everything that he's done for the first 3 games, even with Aaron Rodgers, has been the exact same thing that he's done over the past 2 years. So without a breakout season this year, his dynasty value is most certainly in trouble. I would be looking to sell if I still can. I would move over to a Rashee Rice, over to a Nico Collins. Maybe you could try to buy low on a Puka Nacua right now. I think the days of using Garrett Wilson to pay up for Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. have kind of passed, but if you can do that, that would be great. I think Jamar Chase kind of showed how good that he can still be Monday night. Amon-Ra still shown that he can be good over the past 2 weeks. Justin Jefferson still elite. CeeDee Lamb is still elite. It's just kind of hard, I think, with Garrett Wilson right now, because I think other wide receivers have passed him very much over the past 3 weeks, that it's going to be hard to buy those wide receivers. But then he feels like he could still have that breakout potential, that I would still take Garrett Wilson over, a Chris Olave or a Jalen Waddle or a Brandon Ayuk right now, just because I think the situation is still better for Wilson. But it's going to be a very, very slippery slope, I think, moving forward with him, that if he just continues to do the same things that he's done over the past 2 years, it's not going to look all that great. And then we're talking about what happens whenever Aaron Rodgers is there, who's the new quarterback. Is Garrett Wilson going to be a year 4, year 5 kind of breakout, or is he just Terry McLaurin? Is he just DJ Moore on the Carolina Panthers that then needs a whole fresh start on a new team to then break out? Wilson, there's still upside, and still just a 3-week sample size, but the conversation needs to be starting. We need to start having the conversation about Garrett Wilson in terms of if this is actually the year for the breakout, and what's that going to do for his dynasty value if he doesn't break out to the level that everybody was hoping for. All right. First game from the Sunday slate. I started out with the most boring game of the whole entire thing, the Chargers and the Steelers. It's just very obvious what both teams want to do. Their identity is very much set in stone through the first 3 weeks. They just want to run the ball. Dobbins is an every week RB2. Gus Edwards is just kind of a nice handcuff at this point in case Dobbins were to get hurt again. Najee is an every week RB3 or a flex. Jaylen Warren kind of in the same situation as Gus Edwards. I really don't want to start Jaylen Warren if you can avoid it. But he is, again, a nice handcuff if Najee were to get hurt. Pickens is an every week wide receiver 3 or a flex kind of guy, just because he's the only person consistently getting volume on an every week basis. But Fields just really isn't throwing all that much and isn't really good at throwing the ball. So Pickens is just kind of held back by that. I'm holding everybody. I'm not doing anything with anybody on this team that I wasn't already doing before. So it just kind of is what it is with the Chargers and Steelers. Their identities are very much what we expected them to be. Just run the ball, which it's working for both of them. I mean, Steelers are 3-0, the Chargers are 2-1 because they lost to the 3-0 Steelers. But for fantasy football, it's just kind of a dud, and it just kind of is what it is. So it's unfortunate. All right, Texans and the Vikings now. On the Texans side of the ball, I wanted to talk about Tank Dell. 11 fantasy points this week, 6 targets for a 19% target share. Week 3 was actually the first game that Tank Dell has eclipsed the double-digit mark for fantasy football because he is very clearly the wide receiver 3. I think, honestly, he might be a weekly sit, or maybe you could play him if they're expected to be in like some big shootout kind of a game where the over-under's like up or above 50 total points. That might be the time that you could start Tank Dell for fantasy when we expect it to kind of be a higher scoring game. But he is very clearly the wide receiver 3. It's obvious that Stephon Diggs is ahead of him. It's very obvious that Nico Collins is ahead of him. Maybe he's still dealing a little bit with the injury that happened at the end of last year, or with him getting shot at the bar or whatever a few months ago. Maybe there's still some of that going on, but it's just it's hard, I think, to trust a guy like Tank Dell as the wide receiver 3. And the only reason that he is still semi-startable is just because of CJ Stroud and how good this offense actually is. But if you're a contender, I don't know how much longer I can continue to throw Tank Dell out there. He's a really good hold right now, or a really good buy for rebuilders. But I just feel like there might be better options if you are competing, that you can go cheaply buy some other wide receivers that we might talk about later in this video, or an older, just very productive kind of guy, to where you might just want that production now and hold Tank Dell for the future. So that's just kind of where we're at. I think we're Tank Dell. On the flip side, Aaron Jones had another fantastic day. 25 fantasy points, 19 carries for over 100 yards, 5 receptions for almost 50 yards and a touchdown. He is still, I think, a very great buy low for contenders. He's had very strong performances, like I said, in 2 out of 3 games. It seems like that week 2 game in San Francisco really, at least in this 3-game sample size that's really, really small, but that week 2 game appears to be the outlier in terms of the Ty Chandler usage that we saw that week, the lack of Aaron Jones usage that we saw that week. Weeks 1 and 3 were very, very strong for Aaron Jones. They showed that he is the clear RB1 for the Vikings. And with that same role, and with how good the Vikings offense is low-key kind of been, with the fact that they're also undefeated, he's a very high upside RB2 with this RB1 kind of weekly upside. If he scores, or if he, is really, really efficient, or catches a handful of passes, kind of like he did all 3 of those things this week, which led to a 26 fantasy point week. But if he continues to kind of do most of those things consistently, he's going to be a really, really good high upside RB2 as long as he remains healthy, and a great buy for contenders right now if you are looking for running back help. Now, the Eagles and Saints game, this game was not at all what I expected it to be, or what really anybody, I think, expected it to be. The one thing that we got, I think, out of the Eagles side was Dallas Goedert. Of course, 10 receptions, 170 yards, 11 targets for a 29% target share. Did have 6.8 fantasy points in PPR formats in week 2. And just the overall massive, massive performance for Dallas Goedert. I think it's very possible that, along with Devonta Smith, who was a big time winner from the AJ Brown injury, also had a really good game against the Saints this week. But Dallas Goedert could also be the secondary beneficiary of the AJ Brown injury, and also the fact that I know Britton Covey didn't really mean anything, but with Covey kind of out, if this target share kind of gets even more condensed for the Philadelphia Eagles, that Dallas Goedert could have some really solid tight end weeks, and especially with how bad tight ends have been. I'm not actively buying Dallas Goedert, but I think that if you had him, depending on who your other tight ends are, he should probably be an every week starter, so long as at least AJ Brown is out. Then we'll see what happens whenever AJ Brown comes back in. I still think that he could be a weekly starter with AJ Brown in, but with AJ Brown out, I'm not saying that Goddard's going to do this every week, but he could be a very strong top 5 potential tight end, just because of how bad the tight end position has been so far to start the year. Again, not buying him, not selling him, just a solid hold, especially for contenders. that if you just happen to have Dallas Goedert on your team, I think that you have an extra startable tight end. Now on the Saints side of it, the Chris Olave get right game actually finally happened this week against a bad Eagles defense. I had him in my DraftKings lineup, so it was really nice to see that the get right game happened this week. 20 fantasy points, 6 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown, 26% target share. But I did say last week that I was waiting for the get right game to then sell Chris Olave. I talked about week 1 and 2, the Saints had massive success. They scored 40 plus total points each week without really anything from Chris Olave. This week, they actually used Chris Olave, but the offense still doesn't look all that good. Not saying that there's really a correlation there, but I was hoping for and looking for that get right game for Chris Olave to then sell him, because I just don't think that he is consistently going to be a part of this offense to where the breakout season is going to happen for him. It's kind of the same conversation that we had with Garrett Wilson, where if the breakout season doesn't happen for Chris Olave, and I've been preaching this all summer, if it doesn't happen this year, he's also going to be, Terry McLaurin. He's going to be DJ Moore on the Panthers, and he's still very talented. This is nothing against Olave himself. It's just from a fantasy and a dynasty perspective, I think he's been slightly overvalued because of his talent and because of his age, that the production hasn't matched it. And if the production doesn't match this year, then I think the community is going to catch up to that. So this was the game that I was looking to use to then sell Chris Olave. Again, if you could use him to bump up into the Rashee Rice tier, the Nico Collins tier, buy low on Puka, buy low on AJ Brown. That's what I would love to be doing with Chris Olave right now. I'd even side grade him over to Brandon Ayuk. Or maybe you could use this as and the Tua injury to get Jalen Waddle plus for Chris Olave. I think there's a lot of moves that you could do with Chris Olave right now, especially off of this game, that might have reinstilled some confidence in people that you can then use them to sell in Dynasty. Broncos and Bucs game, the surprise game of the week, I should say, with the Broncos beating the Buccaneers. Bo Nix, 216 yards, 69% completion percentage, did have 9 carries for 47 yards, scored a touchdown. So that touchdown was a big part of his fantasy performance. But that was basically it for Bo Nix, but he has been steadily improving every single week. Week 3 was the first week that he didn't throw an interception. It was a career high through 3 games. It was a career high in completion percentage, also a career high in rushing yards, and he did score a touchdown. He still hasn't thrown an actual touchdown like Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels both did this week. But at least I think I'm seeing improvement every single week from Bo Nix that is not giving me a ton of confidence that, he's going to be a starter in my starting lineup, but at least confidence that there is upside for the future that I want to hold him. I'm not buying him, but if you had Bo Nix, I wouldn't necessarily be looking to sell. I still think that he's a very solid hold and is a really good, I think, QB3 in Dynasty is kind of like a project guy just to see what goes on. Now on the Bucs side, Bucky Irving, 11.4 PPR fantasy points, 9 carries for 70 yards, 3 receptions for 14 yards. I'm basically calling him the 2024 version of Tyjae Spears. We are watching a change happen in Tampa Bay. Bucky Irving is very much still inconsistent and inefficient, I should say. Still very involved in the receiving game, so that's good for him. That's good for his fantasy numbers, but it is so clear that Bucky Irving is better than Rachaad White on the ground. And Bucky can still, catch the ball basically as well as Rachaad White. There's really not a lot that Bucky Irving can't do that Rachaad White does well. So I think that he's basically the 2024 version of Tyjae Spears. I'm buying into Bucky Irving. I'm not buying in as the same reason, for the same reasons as we were buying Tyjae Spears last year, that, Derrick Henry was an impending free agent. Maybe Spears got the workhorse volume RB1 role. That didn't happen for him. I'm not looking to do that with Bucky Irving. I'm just buying him because I think that he is a very good running back. I think that he has the ability to be the RB1A in this offense, a la what we hoped Spears would have been with Tony Pollard, but Bucky is that with Rachaad White. So that's why I'm buying Bucky Irving for 2024, because I think that he's just that good of a running back that I would like to buy him on my team. A better version of Jaylen Warren, maybe I should say too, as kind of the 2024 Tyjae Spears. All right, the Packers and Titans game, the revenge game for Malik Willis. There's really nothing I I saw from this game for the Packers that I really wanted to talk about. We're really just waiting on Jordan Love to come back to then elevate the offense back to a higher level for fantasy football, to get Jane Reed back in, to maybe get Christian Watson back in, elevate Josh Jacobs, and everybody else involved. Because Malik Willis, granted, has not been half bad. He's been pretty solid over the past 2 weeks. Has gotten them to 2 extra wins without Jordan Love. So he's done his job and he hasn't looked bad doing it, but he's just not as good as Jordan Love, especially from a fantasy perspective. He just does not elevate the weapons on the team to the same level that Jordan Love does. So we're really just waiting for Jordan Love to come back. And until then, Malik Willis is fine. He's getting the job done from an NFL standpoint. Just for fantasy, it's just not really what we want. But on the Texans side of it, Nuke Hopkins, 20 fantasy points, 6 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown, 20% target share for 7 targets. It looks like he's getting healthier. I mean, this is the best week that he's had by far. He had more production this week than he had in the week 1 and 2 combined. The one thing that I thought was interesting is that he still hasn't played over 50% of snaps yet in a game this year. He played, I think it was either 46 or 48%, if my memory serves correctly, the snap share that he played in week 3. So he still hasn't played over 50% of snaps and did this on a part-time role, which I think is very, very interesting. That there means that there's still room to grow for fantasy for this year. I think that he is still more talented than Calvin Ridley, or at least as talented, to where it's kind of like a 1A, 1B situation. So that might still kind of be annoying if 1 week it's Calvin Ridley, 1 week it's Nuke Hopkins, 1 week maybe it's just Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. But I think that I saw enough here to say that Nuke Hopkins is still here and still relevant for fantasy in 2024. If you had him already on a contending team, I would be holding him. He's really not a bad buy for contenders, especially like I said, if you were hoping on Tank Dell doing something, and you can go buy Nuke Hopkins for a couple of thirds or trade away some, upside kind of rookie, like trade Ricky Pearsall for Nuke Hopkins or something like that. If you had him as a contender, I don't think that that's like a bad move if you're just trying to get some spot start production at the wide receiver position. If you were, like I said, hoping for Tank Dell, missing Puka or AJ Brown, Nuke Hopkins might be like a really good kind of short-term temporary band-aid for that kind of a situation. That he's not a bad buy, especially if he continues to get more involved as he's playing more snaps every week. All right. Giants and Browns game. Daniel Jones on the Giants side, 19 fantasy points, 236 yards and 2 touchdowns, 20 rushing yards. The main takeaway for me with Daniel Jones is that Malik Neighbors might mess around and save his job in New York. That's honestly, I think there is a greater than 0% chance that Daniel Jones is still the starter in 2025, namely because of Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is that good. He's that fantastic and that elite that he is making Daniel Jones look like I don't want to say a decent quarterback, but like a startable bridge quarterback, that if the Giants don't find themselves in a situation in the draft next year to get a guy that they like, they might just punt to 2026, maybe try to get Arch Manning or something like that. Or, I don't know I can't remember what the free agency looks like for 2025, but if they, with all the money they dumped into Daniel Jones, they might not be able to sign a high profile quarterback next year in free agency. So Daniel Jones might be the starter in 2025. I would still be looking to sell him just because I don't think he's all that good. But if you have him as your QB3, especially if you have him and you're waiting on a guy like Bo Nix or waiting on a guy like Drake May or hoping on Bryce Young or something like that, Jones is not I don't think he's a bad fantasy QB3, especially now that there is a chance that he has a bit more longevity if he is the starter in 2025. I still think that he's not the starter in 2025, but there's a greater than 0% chance that he is still the starter next year, which may or may not be a good thing. But on the Browns side of it, at least, Amari Cooper, the week 3 was apparently the good week for get right games with him and Chris Olave. 7 receptions, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns on 12 targets, which is a 33% target share, 27.5 PPR fantasy points. I mean, it was bound to happen at some point. He was just getting way too much volume not to have a breakout week. They just needed to connect, and they connected big time. First touchdown, I think, of the day on Sunday, and then caught another one later on. They connected well, and it was bound to happen with how much volume that he was getting over the first 2 weeks. I'm still not buying Amari, though, just because I think that Deshaun Watson is very bad for him. But if you have him, I don't think there's any reason to sell if you are a competing team that had Amari Cooper. Obviously, if you're not competing, then I would be looking to sell him just because of his age and dynasty. But if you are competing and you already had Amari, I don't really think there's any reason to sell. There might not be anything worth getting for Amari to even make it worthwhile to sell. But if you are competing and you don't have Amari Cooper, I don't know if I would necessarily be going to look to buy him right now, because this might have been the game that Amari Cooper managers were looking for to then sell him, kind of like what I was talking about with Chris Olave. So I'm just holding him. Colts and Bears game going on here. So two quarterbacks basically on opposite ends of the spectrum, I think, and we can kind of talk about them simultaneously. Caleb Williams is on his way up. This was by far the best game that he's had so far, and just kind of like Bo Nix, he has looked better every single week. 360 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He threw the ball 52 times, but he looked very solid. He had a handful of fantastic passes to Odunze, to DJ Moore, to Cole Kmet. The offensive line is still obviously a very big problem, but Keenan Allen hasn't played yet, so we'll see what the offense looks like with Keenan Allen. Hopefully there's some more consistency that comes along with that. Caleb Williams is definitely a buy. If there was anything at all of a buy window, it might have shut by now because of this performance. But I would still be looking to buy Caleb Williams because I still think that upside and the trajectory is still there for him. He just needs an offensive line, essentially. Now on the flip side, Anthony Richardson, dude, he has not looked good. Honestly, I think the experiment is done. I think it's very clear that he is not a franchise quarterback. He is not to the level of a passer as a quarterback to be a franchise QB. He's much closer to Justin Fields than he is Lamar Jackson or even Cam Newton, the popular comp that he had coming out of college. I mean, for fantasy football, he can still get it done through the ground. I mean, he could rush for 50 yards and a touchdown or two, and that could just save your fantasy week. And anything that he does through the air is just kind of gravy at that point. But I don't want to hold on to Anthony Richardson anymore. If you had him and you were hoping for a breakout, I would be using any leftover value that he still has as a potential top 10 guy to then try to sell him. I'm not even sure where he is on Keep Trade Cut. I'm very interested to see what his ranking still is. He's still ranked as the QB 10 on Keep Trade Cut. He's lost a lot of value, but he's still in the same tier as Jordan Love and Joe Burrow. Still not very far behind of Kyler Murray or Jaden Daniels. And he's right in there with Caleb Williams too. I would be moving to Dak Prescott. I would move to Jared Goff plus, Baker Mayfield plus. I think I'm done with Anthony Richardson, and I just want to sell him. I want to sell him before the rest of the community starts to realize that he is not the long-term answer in Indy. And people are already talking about it. It's not like I'm like the first one to say this or anything like that. People are already talking about it, but I don't think it's reached community consensus at this point that Anthony Richardson is not a franchise QB. And I want to sell before it gets to that point, before everybody starts to realize it and they just start calling him Justin Fields 2.0. Panthers and Raiders now. On the Panthers side, we have life. We have life in Carolina. It figures that Andy Dalton is the one to save the Panthers and to actually effectively run the Dave Canales offense. But this is fantastic. Everything that I saw against the Raiders defense too is really, really a good sign for Carolina's fantasy production and fantasy players. Dalton looked great. Diontae Johnson looked fantastic. Chuba Hubbard looked fantastic. Thielen was even doing well before he got hurt on his touchdown pass. And this is good news, I think, for Jonathan Brooks whenever he comes back too. I know I have this at the end here. I know it's just 1 week, but I think I'm in on the Carolina Panthers offense under Andy Dalton. I think Bryce Young was really the problem. Not to say that Andy Dalton is going to be a long-term starter for Carolina, but I think that they have removed – the problem was Bryce Young. And if they can get a quarterback that Dave Canales is invested in next year, then I think that's good news for the entire offense as a whole. I think this is good for Diontae. It's good for Chuba. It's good for Jonathan Brooks when he gets back. I'm buying Diontae Johnson. I'm very happy with that. I'm still buying Jonathan Brooks. I've always been buying Jonathan Brooks. But this performance with Andy Dalton instilled so much confidence in me for Diontae Johnson that I'm back in. I'm back in on Diontae, and I'm excited for Brooks when he gets back. Now, on the Raiders side, Zamir White is dead. He's done for. 3.4 PPR fantasy points in what should have been the best week of the season for him against like the worst run defense that got absolutely torched in the first 2 weeks by J.K. Dobbins and Alvin Kamara. Zamir White couldn't even break 35 yards. He didn't have a single reception, 3.4 fantasy points. 30 different running backs. I actually tweeted this out. 30 different running backs have scored more fantasy points in one game this year than Zamir White has all year. And one of those 30 running backs is his teammate, Alexander Mattison. He is a massive roster clogger. You really should have. I don't want to like pat myself on the back too much, but like it just seems so obvious that you really should have sold Zamir White before we got to this point. But if you, I would still be selling him right now. He's not like let's wait and see. Hopefully he has a good game kind of a guy. No, I'm selling him for a third. I'm selling him for a fourth. I'm almost at the point where I think Zamir White could be dropped in Dynasty. And if you can get anything to avoid you dropping him for nothing, anything is better than nothing. And I want anything to get rid of Zamir White. He is that bad and definitely not worth it to be on your roster. Dolphins and Seahawks game now. On the Dolphins side of the ball, this was probably very predictable, but the whole offense is bad with Skylar Thompson. It's so annoying that Skylar Thompson was somehow the best answer for the quarterback position after Tua in case Tua were to get hurt. It's like you saw how fragile Tua could be with this concussion and his history with concussions, but Skylar Thompson was your best answer for that. I find that so hard to believe, and it's so annoying because he is so bad, and he's so bad for the offense that even Tyreek, he had 7 fantasy points. Jalen Waddle did not look good. Devon Achane did not look good. The whole offense just sputters with Skylar Thompson in at quarterback, and I don't know if Tyler Huntley fixes it. I don't know if I can't even remember who the other guy that they have on the team now anymore is, but like I don't know if this is just an offense thing or a Skylar Thompson thing. But if you're a contender, I would honestly be looking to try to see what you can get for Tyreek Hill. I know that he's also fallen on Keep Trade Cut. He is now the wide receiver 15. He was a top 10 guy before. Even coming into this week, I think he was a top 10 guy. But he's now fallen behind Devonta Smith, behind Chris Olave, behind Rome Odunze even. Like I would be trying to sell Tyreek Hill because this isn't necessarily just for, he's had bad production without Tua. There's also an age thing in coming into this. He's going to be 31 next year. That I would like to buy back some age and not totally lose Tyreek Hill's value. Because if he were to get hurt or anything like that would just be horrible for his dynasty value. So if you could find a way to buy back some age and maybe still get similar production to what Tyreek was doing with Tua and more production than what he's going to do with Skylar Thompson, I would be doing that. Moving to a Brandon Ayuk, buying low on Puka for now, buying low on AJ Brown for now, buying maybe a Devonta Smith or the other guy on DK Metcalf, 20 fantasy points, 4 receptions for 104 yards, 1 touchdown, and 6 targets. I put on here some Aretha Franklin RESPECT because it's time to put some respect on DK's name for what he's done. 100 plus yards and a touchdown each of the past 2 weeks. We know that he's a fantastic talent. I think he is very much the wide receiver 1 in Seattle. And his issue from a fantasy perspective has just been that he's had 3 great seasons of individual stats. So he's had like 1 year he had all the targets, but he didn't really have any production. 1 year he had all the touchdowns, but he didn't have the yards or the targets to back it up. Then 1 year he had all the yards, but he didn't have the touchdowns or the targets to back it up. He just needs to put it all together into one season. And if he can do that, and 2024 is that season, if he can consistently still do what he's done over the past 2 weeks, over the next 13 weeks, then I think that we could be looking at DK Metcalf possibly resurging back into the top 15. I don't think he's ever going to get back into the top 12, but top 15 for Dynasty could be where DK lands again. And I think that he could be a guy that, like I said, if you're selling on Tyreek as he's kind of descending and catching DK Metcalf at the right time, that could potentially be a good move. And you might even get something on top of DK Metcalf to move Tyreek Hill because it's still Tyreek Hill. So yeah, that's kind of the, again, I'm not looking to sell. If you're a contender and you have Tyreek Hill, I'm not looking to sell him just to get off of him, because I still think Tua comes back at some point later in the year. So maybe for the second half of the fantasy playoffs, you get Tyreek Hill with Tua. But I think this is a conversation that we need to start having because of Tyreek's age, the not great production without Tua, that maybe it's a good time to sell him for comparable production from a younger wide receiver. That's basically what I'm looking for. Like, I'm not selling Tyreek for a first or 2 firsts or anything. If you're a contender, I would just keep him at that point and just hope the production comes back and hope Tua comes back. But maybe Tyreek for DK is an interesting trade to explore if you have Tyreek as a contender. Ravens-Cowboys game. 2 tight ends to talk about from this one. The first one being Mark Andrews. 0 fantasy points, put up a big old donut. Only had 1 target, didn't catch the target. But Isaiah Likely also only had 1 target. He caught the target, but only for 4 yards. So Likely only had 1.4 fantasy points to Mark Andrews' 0. And again, maybe this is my love for Mark Andrews, but I am not panicking at all on Mark Andrews. In fact, I would love to buy him cheap because everybody else seems to be panicking about Mark Andrews, and I would love to buy Mark Andrews. If you looked at this game, this was such a bad game for the Baltimore Ravens passing offense that nobody did well. Zay Flowers didn't do well. Isaiah Likely didn't do well. Rashad Bateman had like 2 catches. I think the leading receiver for the Ravens this week was Nelson Aguilar. So this was just a bad game offensively for the passing weapons of Baltimore. Derrick Henry rushed for like over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Lamar also rushed for a touchdown. So this is just a rushing game for them, not a passing game for them. I would be panicking a lot more if Mark Andrews did this and Zay Flowers did well and Isaiah Likely was doing well, to where I was thinking that Mark Andrews was just kind of getting left behind. But I think Mark Andrews he just didn't do well because nobody did well. So I'm not panicking. I'm buying Mark Andrews. I still think that he is a tight end 1 for fantasy and every week starter, a top 5 potential kind of guy still. Maybe the ultimate ceiling that we saw from him over the past couple of years isn't there anymore, but that doesn't mean that he's still not a very quality every week, top 5, top 7 kind of a tight end kind of a guy. And if people are panicking on this, I'm buying the crap out of Mark Andrews. It's hard for me, honestly, to buy him because I already had him basically everywhere. But where I don't have him, I would love to buy if the people are panicking. Now, another tight end that I would love to buy on the opposite side of this is Jake Ferguson, who had 15.5 fantasy points, 6 receptions, 95 yards, 11 targets, 21% share. Welcome back, Jake Ferguson, off of his injury. And it's basically, this is exactly what I hoped for coming into the year, that CeeDee Lamb was obviously going to be the alpha for the team. But then the wide receiver 2, or the second target on the team, was massively wide open. It was either going to be Jake Ferguson, it was going to be Brandon Cooks. Long shot, maybe it was Jalen Tolbert, but my bet was on Jake Ferguson being that and seeing over 100 targets, or over 110, if not 120 targets this year. And if he continues to do this, then he's going to be potentially a league winner. I'm trying to buy him as a if you have like Evan Ingram or David Njoku, or you still have Travis Kelce and he's not producing well. Basically, any tight end that's not like McBride or Bowers or Kincaid or Andrews, I would be buying Jake Ferguson because I think that he could honestly, realistically be a top 5 fantasy tight end this year because of the volume and just as a PPR kind of guy. It doesn't even need to score all that much. Just volume alone is going to get him to top 5 fantasy scoring because of how bad the rest of the tight ends are. Like if he's this year's Trey McBride, I wouldn't be all that shocked. I am buying the crap out of Jake Ferguson too, because I think that he could be very consistently an elite. I shouldn't say an elite fantasy tight end. Maybe not an elite dynasty tight end, but elite fantasy tight end for 2024 is what I think Jake Ferguson could be. Now, the Lions and Cardinals game. On the Lions side of the ball, David Montgomery, dude, 21 fantasy points, 23 carries, 105 yards and a touchdown, 3 receptions for 17 yards. He even out-targeted Jahmyr Gibbs in this one. I will just always and forever prop up David Montgomery as an excellent buy for any contender. I think that he has some name value, but not a ton of name value. I don't know if people realize that he's a top 10 fantasy running back right now, but he is. He is just so consistently good. He has so much touchdown equity. He has just RB2 fantasy production with RB1 upside if he were to score multiple times or break a big one for over 100 yards like he did here. I just feel like he's just so undervalued that as any contender who needs a running back, which I'm sure there are a ton of you out there, go buy David Montgomery. And the upside that he would have if Jahmyr Gibbs were to miss any games whatsoever is just massive. Go buy David Montgomery. He's a guy that if you still have your late 2025 first and you're that much of a contender, I would be willing to send that 2025 first for David Montgomery. Anything less than a first is a smash. 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I would pay all that for David Montgomery, but I'd be willing to pay your late 2025 first for Monty because I think he's that good. And he also offers that longevity as well, that he could be the same exact guy next year in this Lions offense in 2025. So he's worth the first round pick. Now, Cardinals side of the ball, there really wasn't much to talk about from this game for Arizona. So why not just continue to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr.? He's great. He's elite. What more could you want? 17 fantasy points, 5 receptions, 64 yards, 1 touchdown, 11 targets for a 33% target share. He's Marvin Harrison Jr., man. He's really, really good. So, that's all basically that we had to talk about, I think, from the Arizona side. Michael Wilson looked good too, but this is Marvin Harrison Jr.'s receiver room. So he's great. Niners in the Rams game. I really didn't have all that many takeaways from this one other than just holy Jawan Jennings. I wouldn't be buying Jawan Jennings based on this performance, but I do think that he could be a solid guy to start with Deebo Samuel out as the Deebo replacement in this offense. But I'm using this to continue buying Brandon Ayuk. I will just forever continue to buy Brandon Ayuk just because I don't think that he is meeting the standard or the level of production that he should be getting to and where we've seen him be for the past 2 years. So I think that the buy window for Ayuk is extended one more week, but it may shut this week in week 4. Just keep buying Brandon Ayuk. And then on the Rams side of the ball, this offense sucks, except Kyron Williams, but this offense sucks. I really don't want to start Matthew Stafford. I don't know which of the receivers I want. I don't want any of them. Tutu Atwell led the receivers this week, but it could be Tyler Johnson next week. It could be Marcus Robinson. It could be Colby Parkinson. Kyron is the only guy you can start on the Rams without Puka and Kupp because his offense sucks. So that's basically it. Chiefs and Falcons game now. We figured out the answer to who the running back was without Isaiah Pacheco. It was Carson Steele. The majority of us were correct that Steele would be the leader for this backfield, at least in terms of the 2-down work. Samaje Perine did get some receiving work and some rushing work too. But Carson Steele was the main guy, 17 carries, 72 yards, only 1 catch for 2 yards, 8.4 fantasy points. That's about it, though. I have him in here as Jordan Mason light just because he's not catching the ball. He is a temporary fill-in for a starter that we know is significantly better than him. I just don't view all that much upside. He had 17 carries for 72 yards. That's a great NFL stat line. That is 7.2 fantasy points. And because he's not catching anything, he caught 1 reception for 2 yards. That's what bumped him up over 8 fantasy points. So I don't see much fancy upside. I'd be looking to sell, even if you're a contender and you just picked up Carson Steele, or you had him as as a guy that you picked up during the preseason because of the hype from then. I'd be looking to sell him to any contender because I don't really think that there's much upside. There's not much longevity. Any second round pick will do. I'd sell Carson Steele for any second. And he would be off my team, even to another contender. He's gone. On the flip side, Darnell Mooney for the Falcons, 14 fantasy points, 8 receptions, 66 yards on 8 targets, 27% target share. Also had 7 targets. In week 2. And he's kind of become the Falcons version of Darnell Mooney Falcons version. He is the Falcons version of Jordan Addison. There we go. And Justin nailed this one. Justin had him at least in one video, maybe even 2 before the season, that Darnell Mooney was a great buy as a guy that could kind of be this year's Brandon Cooks or this year's Kendrick Bourne kind of a player that is giving you more production, but his value is just so cheap in the offseason that he was worth the shot. Justin nailed it. Mooney's looked great. 15 targets over the past 2 weeks. Like I said, he's turned into a wide receiver that I feel like I can trust in the flex or the wide receiver 3 spot. Because the volume seems to be there. Cousins trusts him. He's definitely solidified himself as a really solid talent and target in this Falcons offense. And maybe that was some of it's because maybe Rondale Moore might have gotten hurt. Maybe that's the case. But Mooney's a former 1,000-yard receiver. He himself was really, really good in Chicago. And he just seems to be thriving as the wide receiver 2 for a much better quarterback in a much better situation. So I'd be looking to buy Mooney. Another guy that if you are, banking on Tank Dell and his production, maybe you just hold on to Tank Dell, buy Darnell Mooney for cheap, and then use Darnell Mooney's production until Dell kind of comes into his own. So another guy on the list there. All right, into the Monday night games now, the Jags and the Bills. Christian Kirk, welcome back. Welcome to the 2024 season. We missed you, buddy. Didn't know if you know that the season started a few weeks ago, but it was great to see you back. 8 receptions for 79 yards on 10 targets, which is a 26% target share. Hopefully, Trevor Lawrence remembers that Christian Kirk is a really good wide receiver and continues to target him as like the 1A, 1B in this offense moving forward. I'm not buying him. I'm not selling him off of this just because I don't really know if you can sell Kirk because of he just doesn't. He was already undervalued coming into the season after good production in 2022 and 2023. That I think him not doing anything for 2 weeks, then all of a sudden doing something in week 3 isn't going to be the thing that props up his value. So I'm not looking to sell him if you had him, just because I don't really think it's going to be. You're not going to get anything that's worth it. But I'm not buying him either. So just a solid hold. Hopefully he continues to get this kind of target share and production for you to where he could be kind of like that PPR wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 upside kind of guy. On the flip side, Khalil Shakir is doing basically what I thought Christian Kirk was going to be doing to start the year. 19 fantasy points Monday night, 6 receptions, 72 yards and touchdowns, 6 targets, 20% target share. He is very clearly the wide receiver 1 for Buffalo right now. He's asserted himself very clearly over Curtis Samuel, very clearly over Keon Coleman. And I'm sorry for doubting you, Khalil Shakir. I honestly shouldn't have, because I was a big fan of you coming out of college. So I should have stuck with that and not doubted you as the wide receiver 1. But 40 plus yards all 3 weeks, 50 plus each of the last 2 weeks. He scored twice, once in week 1, once in week 3. He's a legit fantasy wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. I'm not like going out to actively buy him just because I don't think Shakir is the long-term answer. I think that they could still look to, Coleman could still come out and be more of like the alpha wide receiver 1 as the season goes on, or maybe they add another wide receiver next year or in free agency. Shakir just doesn't. And again, maybe this is me just undervaluing him, but Shakir just doesn't seem to embody wide receiver 1 material for an NFL team. And maybe that's my issue. And I'm undervaluing Khalil Shakir, but that's kind of like where I'm not trying to go out and like, oh, I'm all in on Khalil Shakir and I'm buying him for Dynasty, but because I just don't see that. But again, another guy that if you were waiting on Tank Dell and you could buy Khalil Shakir, or you had Khalil Shakir already as your kind of bet on the Bills receiving room, he's a guy that I think could spot start you good production for this year as you're waiting for some other guys like Tank Dell to kind of take hold and do their own thing. But yeah, so I'm holding both these guys. I'd be willing to buy Khalil Shakir in the right situation, but I'm not really actively buying both of these guys because I'm excited that both of them are going to have some like long-term high upside, but good production for now. And the final game, Jaden Daniels for the Washington Commanders. I mean, boy, was it was already fun to watch him as a rusher and score fantasy points from a rushing standpoint, but it's even more fun to see him score through the air and produce that way and just throw some beautiful passes to Terry McLaurin. He has such a beautiful deep ball. It's just so much fun to watch Jaden Daniels that I think that we are watching. I mean, you want to talk about a guy that could be like the next Lamar Jackson. That's Jaden Daniels to me, not Anthony Richardson, which the community already has Jaden Daniels over Anthony Richardson. So that's not a hot take, and but whatever. But yeah, Jaden Daniels is good. It's fun to see him throw. Hopefully that confidence to throw continues as the rushing also is there too. He had 40 rushing yards and touchdown. So yeah, this is really, really fun. Jaden Daniels is still a solid buy if you can still get him at all. Flip Joe Burrow for him, CJ Stroud for him, plus flip, to add something to other quarterbacks to go up and get Jaden Daniels, because he's going to be really, really good, I think, for a very long time. On the Bengals side of it, to wrap things up, Tee Higgins, man, 6.9 PPR fantasy points, 3 receptions for 39 yards on 6 targets, was a 16% target share. The box score does not do Tee Higgins any favors in terms of how good he actually looked in this game. I would be using that game and being like, oh, Tee Higgins came back. He only had 6.9 fantasy points. Jamar Chase is still the wide receiver 1 because he had 150 yards and 2 touchdowns or whatever it was. And Higgins is just kind of bleh, and he's still injury prone and whatnot, blah, 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 blah. I would be using all of that as reasons to buy Tee Higgins because I think the Tee Higgins looked phenomenal on Monday night. I went back, I watched the film, I watched all 6 of his targets, especially the 3 that he did not catch. He looked really good on the 3 that he did catch. Looked really good with the ball in his hands. Looked really good route running as well. He was kind of isolated as the X receiver on one side, as Chase and Yoshi were on the other side for his first 2 targets. So very much still the X, or one of the outside wide receivers for the Bengals, and Burrow continues to look his way. But the 3 receptions, or the 3 targets, I should say, that he did not connect on. One was a deep pass down the sideline towards the end zone that Higgins did catch. He just kind of caught it out of bounds just because of where Burrow had to throw it, so it didn't get picked. But I mean, Higgins caught it. He just caught it out of bounds. That would have added like another 30 yards to his stat line. And then Burrow missed him on an end zone target. Higgins was, just wide open. He kind of found a pocket in the zone defense and just kind of sat in it. And I think Burrow saw him and just saw how open he was. And I don't know if he kind of panicked or if he was just like, oh, let me get the ball to him really quick. But Burrow's pass was really off target that Higgins did. Again, he caught it, but he was out of bounds. He didn't get 2 feet in and got 1 foot in before his elbow hit. But Higgins was wide open. And had he caught that, even if he just caught that touchdown, 4 receptions for like 40 yards and a touchdown, that's a wildly different stat line, wildly different fantasy performance that I think people would be talking about Tee Higgins a lot more in his first week back as a buy than they are right now because he didn't catch that touchdown. And then the very next play, Yoshi caught the touchdown. So that's just kind of where it was and how it went for the Bengals on that drive and how it went for Higgins on that drive. But the other missed target was also an end zone target. It was an end zone fade that I think Burrow just kind of lasered in a back shoulder throw. Again, it was a solid throw. But they just didn't connect on it. So those are the 3 targets that Higgins missed on, that any one of those could have drastically changed the stat line, especially if he had caught that wide open touchdown, could have drastically changed the stat line and the perception of Tee Higgins. So because he didn't do any of that, this is kind of like a Brandon Ayuk situation where I would love to buy Tee Higgins off this game because the box score, if you're just looking at the box score, you're just looking at the fantasy game log, not a good game. But watch the film, good game, just didn't connect. And it will happen. And Higgins looked good. He looked healthy. So I'm buying Tee Higgins as a fantasy wide receiver too, if you can, especially because I think he's wide receiver 30 on Keep Trade Cut. Actively going out and buying Tee Higgins. Where is he? Yeah, wide receiver 30. So I would trade Jordan Addison for him. I'd trade Ladd McConkey for him. I would trade Keon Coleman for him. I would trade Xavier Worthy for him. Tank Dell, honestly, is even interesting. I'd trade Zay Flowers for him. I'd trade Jaden Reed for him. So Higgins is a dynasty wide receiver 2 for me, and he's valued as wide receiver 30 on KTC. So good buy opportunity. But all right, that does it for the week 3 dynasty lessons learned. I appreciate you guys for hanging out, watching the whole video. If you got this far, this is actually the last week that we're doing this for 2024. Next week, I'm going to have a video to kind of give you guys direction on where to go with your teams based on if you're competing in the middle or rebuilding. So that's next week's kind of video. And maybe we'll bring this back as the season kind of goes along. But for right now, this was at least the last video for lessons learned because we're starting to see the trends. It's getting harder for me to fill this out because trends are happening. We're seeing it over and over. Team identities are happening. Players are getting, comfortable in their roles, and people know who's producing, who's not producing, who's doing well, who's not for this year. So at least for the time being, lessons learned will be done for 2024, but much more fantastic content coming your way starting next week, like I said, with a video to help to give you guys direction on where to go, depending on where you are in your league. But until then, appreciate you guys for hanging out and watching through this video. So I'm terrible at outros, so I'm just going to end it. Peace.